The snow fell gently that December evening, covering the small town of Maple Ridge like a soft white blanket. Christmas was just 3 days away, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry, shopping, decorating, preparing for the big day. Everyone except Daniel Mitchell. Daniel sat on a wooden bench in the town park, his worn suit hanging loosely on his thin frame. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, trying to find warmth that wasn't there. He stared at the ground, watching snowflakes melt on his old leather shoes. Just 6 months ago, Daniel had a good job, a nice apartment, and plans for the future. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. He lost his job when the company downsized. Then the bills piled up, the apartment was gone, and now, here he was, homeless, hopeless, and alone during the most wonderful time of the year, or so everyone called it. To Daniel, it was just another cold night. "Excuse me, mister?" A small voice broke through his thoughts. Daniel looked up and saw a little girl standing in front of him. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, wearing a beautiful red Christmas dress and a matching hat with a white pom-pom on top. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, and her eyes sparkled with innocence. "Yes?" Daniel managed a weak smile. "Are you sad?" she asked, tilting her head. Daniel didn't know what to say. How do you explain adult problems to a child? "I'm just a little tired, sweetheart," he said softly. The little girl studied him for a moment, then reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small candy cane and held it out to him. "Here, this always makes me feel better when I'm sad." Daniel felt a lump forming in his throat. Such a simple gesture, yet it touched something deep inside him that he thought had died. "Thank you," he whispered, taking the candy cane with trembling hands. "Emma, don't run off like that!" A woman appeared, walking quickly toward them. She was dressed in a warm beige coat, carrying shopping bags in both hands. When she saw her daughter talking to Daniel, concern flashed across her face, but not the kind Daniel had grown used to, not disgust or fear, just motherly protectiveness. "I'm sorry," the woman said, reaching for Emma's hand. "I hope she wasn't bothering you." "No, not at all," Daniel said quickly, standing up. She's wonderful." The woman looked at Daniel more closely now. She saw the worn suit, the tired eyes, the way he shivered slightly in the cold, and instead of hurrying away like most people did, she paused. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked gently. Daniel wanted to say yes. He wanted to lie, to protect his pride. But something about this woman's kind eyes made the truth spill out. "I've been better, to be honest." Emma tugged at her mother's coat. "Mommy, he's sad. Can we help him feel better, like you always help people?" The woman smiled at her daughter, then looked back at Daniel. "My name is Sarah. This is my daughter, Emma. Would you like to join us for dinner? There's a diner just down the street. Nothing fancy, but the food is warm." Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't want charity. He didn't want pity. But then Emma smiled up at him with that pure, innocent smile that only children have. And he remembered what it felt like to be human, to be seen, to matter. "I don't want to impose," he said quietly. "You're not imposing," Sarah said firmly. "It's Christmas. Nobody should be alone at Christmas." 20 minutes later, Daniel sat in a cozy booth at Rosie's Diner, a steaming plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes in front of him. Emma sat across from him, swinging her legs and talking excitedly about Santa Claus and presents and all the things that make Christmas magical when you're 7 years old. Sarah watched Daniel eat, noticing how he tried not to seem too hungry, even though it was obvious he hadn't had a proper meal in days. "So, Daniel," Sarah said gently, "what do you do, or what?" "Did you do?" Daniel wiped his mouth with a napkin. "I was an accountant. Worked for a mid-sized firm for almost 10 years. Then the economy shifted and, well, I wasn't part of their future plans." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and she meant it. "I looked for other jobs," Daniel continued, surprised at how easy it was to talk to her. "But I'm not young anymore. Companies want fresh graduates, people who work for less money. And then I fell behind on rent, and before I knew it," he trailed off, shaking his head. Emma had stopped talking and was now looking at Daniel with big, serious eyes. "Did Santa forget about you?" she asked. The question was so innocent, so heartbreaking that Daniel had to look away for a moment. Maybe, sweetheart, maybe he did. "No," Emma said firmly, with the absolute certainty that only a child can have. "Santa doesn't forget anybody. Maybe he's just running a little late this year." Sarah reached across the table and gently squeezed Daniel's hand. "Emma might be right, you know. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places." After dinner, Sarah insisted on buying Daniel a warm coat from the thrift store next door. She also gave him the name and number of a friend who ran a small business and was looking for someone to help with bookkeeping. "I can't promise anything," she said, "but Tom is a good man. Tell him I sent you." Daniel stood on the sidewalk holding the coat and the piece of paper with the phone number, feeling something he hadn't felt in months: hope. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "You don't even know me." Sarah smiled and looked down at Emma, who was holding her hand and grinning up at Daniel. "A few years ago, my husband and I went through a really rough time. We almost lost everything. A stranger helped us when we needed it most. No questions asked, no strings attached. They told us to pay it forward someday, so that's what I'm doing." She paused, her eyes glistening. "And honestly, Daniel, I think you needed to be reminded that you're not invisible. You matter. Your life matters." Emma let go of her mother's hand and ran up to Daniel, throwing her small arms around his waist in a tight hug. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Daniel," she whispered. Daniel knelt down and hugged her back, tears streaming down his face. "Merry Christmas, Emma. Thank you both." 2 months later, Daniel walked into that same park. But this time, everything was different. He was wearing a clean suit, one he'd bought with his first paycheck from Tom's business. He had an apartment again. Small, but it was his. He sat on the same bench where he'd sat that snowy December evening, and he smiled. Life wasn't perfect. He still had challenges. But he had hope now. He had a reason to keep going. And every day he looked for ways to pay it forward, just like Sarah had done for him. Because sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness, one person who sees you when everyone else looks away, to change everything. The greatest gifts in life aren't wrapped in paper and tied with ribbons. They're wrapped in compassion, tied with hope, and delivered by the kindest hearts. The end.